Okay, here we are. Hello, and welcome to 1,000 Conversations About the Future, the Power Lunch series. This is a project of the Ithaca Green New Deal that aims to engage all of you in a conversation about the future of Ithaca. I am your lovely and charming host, Rebecca Evans, Sustainability Specialist with the City of Ithaca. And this series is going to feature experts talking about sort of the geekier side of the Green New Deal. So we're talking about tech and economics, electrification, and of course, jobs, all the stuff that kind of makes the Green New Deal really tick. And today we have two very lovely geeks joining us, so that's very exciting. So make sure that you tune in every other Wednesday, sometimes every Wednesday. Actually, lately we've had a very full 2021, but at noon on Wednesdays on our YouTube channel. So we'll leave the chat open on YouTube. So if you do have questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat and we will funnel them to our lovely speakers. But without further ado, we'll go ahead and kick this thing off. So today we have talking about community choice aggregation and energy independence for people right here in Ithaca. We have Ann Rhodes, who is a community educator and activist working for Cornell Cooperative Extension of Tompkins County on the energy and climate change team. And Ann has a varied experience in Ithaca. Her work extends from home energy education to anti-racism activism, and also has a rich history in the theater arts. And we're also joined with Paul Fenn, who co-authored the nation's landmark 1995 municipal aggregation legislation in Massachusetts, which allowed municipalities to choose different electricity providers for their communities. And since then, Paul has played a leading role all across the United States in implementing CCA across the country. So welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. And please take the stage.
Thanks, glad to be here.
Taking the stage. Hi, Paul.
Hello there, Ann.
Hello there. Good to meet you.
Glad to meet you.
Yeah, where are you actually sitting?
I am actually in Western Massachusetts, about an hour east of Albany.
Oh,
A place called Haydenville. We're a farm-based business.
I know Western Mass a little bit. I worked for many years in Fitchburg.
Oh yeah.
There was a really wonderful museum that was connected to a school. And I trained teachers and artists to work together to get critical and creative thinking into the school by focusing on the things in the museum.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, in Fitchburg, the middle of nowhere.
Well, everyone in Massachusetts feels like the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. So, Paul, when you were little, did you imagine that you would end up here?
You know, I thought that you were still wearing tri-cornered hats out here. You know, I'm from Oakland, and so Massachusetts seemed like not only a different place, but a different time. You know, I had this goofy TV idea of the East Coast because I never traveled here until I was college age, really. So no, I really didn't. And I only really came because I went to college in Maine. And that was just out of a fascination for the unknown. It wasn't because of any particular idea of it. So no, it really wasn't expected at all. I met my wife. She's from here. And that's a good part of the reason why I'm here. That we have family here, and so we've lived in California most of our married life. You know, since the mid 1990s, I guess it is. But moved back out here 4 years ago. As exiles from California to embrace New York, the real America.
Yeah.
Because California is like Australia, you know, it's very far away. And in a sense, even though it's very big, doesn't really feel like you're part of the United States in some way.
It's different. It's really different in California. Yep.
Yeah. I love it.
It is.
I love it here. And I really particularly love the fact that it's not getting overrun by bulldozers, which California has been my entire life, and that it's not drying up, you know, which out there it's really quite catastrophic, and it's not filling up with people, and obviously those are related events. So it feels like a future. You know, you walk in the forest here, and maybe it's not full of 1,000-year-old redwoods, but you know, they're probably going to be there in another 100 years. In California, you don't know that anything is going to be there in 100 years.
Yep. Yep. Well, I'm glad you're here. We can definitely use your experience and your expertise
Thank
with
you.
what we're trying to do here with the Ithaca Green New Deal. This community choice aggregation is coming. It's coming. Could we just start with like the words like aggregation? Like, what does aggregation mean?
Aggregation means buying together, not selling, but buying. And so, you know, traditionally, if you had a municipal energy program, it would be a utility, and they would take over the poles and wires, or they would build them. They would build power plants, and then they would turn around and sell it to residents and businesses like a business. Aggregation is a different idea, which is to organize needs instead of supplies, and then to define how you want the needs provided, and particularly in this case with a desire for change that is not being offered on the marketplace. So aggregation is saying, look, we want something else, not just choice in a generic sense, but we want a different kind of energy. And that how we've done that and designed it has changed over the years. It's been over 30 years that I've been working and doing it. And so it started in one mentality based on what was known then, what I knew. I was young, so I didn't know that much. And then running into the brick wall of the bleeding edge, which I'm sure you're familiar, and learning from that encounter and evolving. So it's evolved, and it's evolved into this kind of meeting of the minds with Ithaca, the local Green New Deal, which is actually what the name we gave our own project. But with the resources that Ithaca has organized, but also the tradition within Ithaca of, you know, Ithaca dollars, something I
Right.
followed in the back in the 90s, and just, you know, this tradition in Ithaca of
Yep.
community, solidarity, and trying to alternative economies and trying
Yep.
to do something different. So hey, it's a good fit.
Yeah, there are other examples of aggregating customers that people might be more familiar with, like in order to get more leverage, like Solar Tompkins was an example of that, where Solar Tompkins would aggregate customers and then negotiate with contractors to get a better deal because they were providing a whole bunch of customers to them. And then that evolved into Heat Smart, which is doing the same thing with heat pumps, but also consumer co-ops is a similar model where the people have a need and they get together in order to purchase in bulk and lower their prices. So it seems like it's kind of like that.
Yes, I think that's accurate. It's really trying to take that to the next level, to where the principle of organization is community wide. So it's not entirely voluntary. It is voluntary in that people can opt out of it, but the community decides through local ordinance and locally adopted law to implement the program community wide, and then allows people to opt out. Otherwise, everyone's enrolled, and the result is you get, you know, I think on average it's still around 85% of the community that will participate, versus strictly voluntary programs that typically get, you know, 5% participation.
Right, because you require people to actually do something to be involved, whereas this is they're automatically involved and they have to do something to get out.
Get out, precisely.
Yeah, so that in community choice aggregation, that explains the aggregation part. So now we're talking about the community choice part.
Yes.
So this is something you said that a municipality will have to adopt, and then individuals who live there will have to stay in or opt out. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is the basic formula for community choice aggregation. There is more to it, though, particularly in the program that we're bringing to Ithaca, which is kind of goes back to the evolution of the idea that the original idea from 30 years ago is exactly as you describe it, and it was just that simple. So the municipality would choose to do it. People would be enrolled unless they wanted to opt out, and then there would be a new service that would be greener, it'd be cheaper, but not really physically different from the old service. They would try to source a greener supplier, for example, more wind power. They would try to buy credits or something like that. And then you would just get it passively as a consumer. If you didn't opt out, you just got this slightly greener or much greener, depending on the community, slightly cheaper or much cheaper, depending on the marketplace. But we've added to it. And so the model now that we're pursuing with the city, it has an additional layer of voluntary participation, which is closer to the co-op model, right, that you were talking about. We say, okay, you've not opted out of this service, you're in. How would you like to do some more things? And those are then voluntary. So you have, this sort of shepherding of the community into a common purpose, and then you have the presentation of new options that maybe aren't available or do take extraordinary effort to achieve and strictly voluntarily. And so the idea is to use that program and the capacity that the program creates, because it does result in staff being hired, expertise being developed, databases and data and knowledge that's sort of organized. And then there's the leverage, the purchasing leverage, because you've enrolled 85% of the community, and you've got that purchasing power of dollars per year. And you can start repurposing that purchasing power toward local community-based projects in the community, which are based on voluntary investment by members of the community. That is like a co-op, where you're taking a more active part in a project, say a solar project or a microgrid or electric vehicle or renewable heat. And maybe it's actually, in your house because you own a house or you own a business and building, or maybe it's in your building because you and your neighbors want to cooperate and you somehow got leverage with the owner of the building, and so you can work that out. Maybe it's down the street because you're a renter and you don't own your house, but you are able to own shares in a facility down the street. It's trying to use that kind of robust municipal, local know-how, savoir-faire, connection, and trust recognition to organize those things so it's much easier to do. And the doing of it is administered, the accounts and the billing, by the municipality. So it isn't some kind of outsourced product that you don't really trust. But so it's an authentically local initiative. I like to compare it to recycling, just in the sense that even though recycling is a mess, that the cooperation of recycling, people actually separate their plastic and their paper, and every week, and they put it in the boxes and they bring it down to the transfer station. That kind of spirit, as opposed to strictly consuming, right? Like, I'm going to choose my green power provider, I'm going to change this new product, to get out of the product mentality and into a more of a purposive mentality. But at the same time, to use that leverage in a more structured way to bring that leverage to renewable energy developers, microgrid developers, electric vehicle charger developers, etc., and to bring innovation in.
Yeah.
To try to get it on a community-wide basis.
Yeah.
So you can meet those expanding solar access goals,
Yeah.
citywide electrification goals that the city has adopted, the carbon radical carbon reduction goals, and really try to set an example of how to ramp that up, to scale it up, to accelerate the processes, and to get much broader adoption, voluntary adoption through this leverage.
Yeah, what I'm hearing, Paul, is it sounds like it's not just an economic shift, it's a paradigm shift. It's a shift from thinking of us all as consumers and focusing on the market and the economy and the dollars and cents, and focusing instead on the people and their needs and how they can work together and what more we can get done when we collaborate. And it feels like that's what needs to be communicated, I think, to people, is that it's a real paradigm shift.
It is. I think it's really essential component of making it work is for people to recognize that this is different. It's not just a product. And so far, there are, outside of the authentic versions of this trajectory, which is out there in civil society, particularly in places like Ithaca, the market, the regulated market and the deregulated market only present Fortune 500 company products, third party,
Yeah,
big bank finance. Everything is sort of prepackaged, and
yeah,
it has all the bells and whistles sort of hidden, and you can't really see it. It's opaque, and so it really forbids participation. And it, in addition to the inherent challenges of energy transition, which is the intellectual complexity to figure out, because I myself do some of these things for myself, trying to get solar energy, etc. And it's just very complex, making the decisions and then trusting the proposals, of how do you really know how to evaluate solar, a battery, a home automation system, renewable heat. These are very difficult to evaluate. And so to create a comfort zone, which has a genuinely community based purpose, mission, is trustworthy. And I really think that's part of it, is just if
yeah,
it's
yeah,
just a product, then nobody's going to trust it. There's so
right.
much fraud in the energy market, including
Yeah.
the energy market, that it's just that's a major barrier to energy
Yeah.
transition.
I think that's what Heat Smart has done, is that they become the trusted intermediary, and you don't just sign up with some contractor and you don't know how to judge between one contractor and another. There's somebody there that's in between, that is checking it out, is doing the research, is trustworthy. You know who they are, it's transparent. So that part of the aggregation feels like critical to
Mhm.
this paradigm shift. So when I asked Luis before today, what does he want people to know as a result of our conversation? And he said he wants to know that this is coming, and he wants them to know that it's good. That it's good for the environment, and it's good for the community. So what I'm hearing you say is there are multiple benefits, potential benefits of making this transition. Not only in terms of economics, that the actual cost of electricity could be cheaper, but we could be sourcing our electricity from way more renewable sources, rather than, we could even choose not to go with nuclear if we decided to do. I mean, there's a lot more community control. There's a lot more benefit to the environment and to individual residents. So speaking of residents, is this going to start with the city as a municipality? Because we have 10 towns around us in the county that are, like, some of them chomping at the bit to get engaged in this. So when we say community, are we talking mainly first about the city and then later on about the towns, or where does that stand?
The idea, as I understand it, is, which and I agree with, is for the city and town to go through the process of preparing the required documentation for the state to get it in process, and that includes a definition of the sort of approach being taken. And this has generally been the best way, among the 1,500 cities that our CCA is serving 30 million Americans. So it is not CCA is not new in that respect. There's lots of experience under the bridge, and generally it's best to try instead of trying to sort of herd a whole region all at the same time. Instead, for jurisdictions that have a clear sense of leadership and clear mandates, in this case, the local Green New Deal, decarbonization goals, right? This is what I basically target, right? I don't work with communities that aren't that clear about what they want to do, because I'm not there to convince them. But if they are clear, then we're ready to give them the tools to do it. And so it's really good to have that leadership, intellectual leadership, political leadership, sort of cultural leadership, so that you're not navel gazing and debating about reinventing the debate 10,000 times. You're just figuring out how to do what you already know you want to do. And then to open it up to all the other communities, say, look, here's what we've developed, jump in. And of course, once they jump in, those who do jump in become members of the governing board
Right.
of the aggregation, and they have every opportunity to then influence its development in the future. So if they want to do things
Right.
included, they can add them. It's just a matter of time. So that way we can get to a meaningful launch schedule. I mean, the plan is 15 months to be finalizing negotiated terms so that we can actually launch the service in that kind of time period, and then we could start the physical energy transition immediately after that, and not have this protracted waiting period, which can take
Right.
place when you take the herding approach, right? It's just
Yep.
too difficult.
Yep.
So that's the
Yep.
idea.
There are people, I'm in touch with the Clean Energy Communities group, statewide group, which is working directly with municipalities in the county. These people have the knowledge and they have the expertise to move. And some of the municipalities want it. So I think there's a sense in which we want to start working with those people even before things are finalized, to share information, to get people educated, to talk with the towns. I mean, so it feels like it will speed up more quickly if we do some of that networking and relationship building right away.
I totally agree with that. I think they could join this aggregation within the 15-month timeline I'm talking about, if they were ready to do so. They obviously could also start to prepare themselves for it, because part of the model is the model is really a partnership model, which is not just a partnership of a bunch of municipalities, because they form the aggregation, they constitute and they govern the aggregation as an agency, but a partnership between the aggregation itself and each individual municipality, because we're trying to get that actual local, not just generic local, but your town handshake to engage people in the program. So it's actually super valuable to get them involved now, so that they're ready to participate, not just as members of the aggregation, but as administrators of their local Green New Deals for each town.
Yeah. Even before some of the municipalities have their own Green New Deal, the Clean Energy Community team has the capacity to do outreach and develop resources and work with us as partners as we move forward in the city and the town. So who has to buy in? Is the city has to buy in, the town has to buy in. They make an agreement at the beginning. That's they have to pass a resolution, or so how does that work?
Yeah, they will adopt, they'll vote on an ordinance, each of them, and then they will vote on an implementation plan. And that's what goes with a couple of other documents, customer engagement plan and a data protection plan. And those go to the New York State Public Service Commission for approval. And after the approval, then they're authorized to go to suppliers. They become legally an aggregator, and they can go and implement the program that they have filed with the state. If they want to change the service, then they just modify the plan, they adopt the modifications and send them to the state. And so it's a flexible instrument, but it does involve state oversight. And that's really, it's a local state process.
So where we are right here in upstate, our electric grid is pretty clean already compared, say, to places. Is this going to help the grid get even cleaner in some way? Or does it just mean that our particular communities will be using cleaner sourcing? Or is it going to actually help the grid?
that's a wonderful, my favorite question. I love that question because there are dimensions to cleanness that aren't don't really register in state and federal policy, which
Yep.
are designed really to standardize markets. And so, for example, if you have legally 100% renewable energy, right, which a lot of aggregations have, but you're using renewable energy certificates to mitigate the purchase of conventional fossil power, you may be legally 100% renewable under state law definitions, but your carbon footprint is completely unaltered. And so this is a big shock to a lot of people that have 100% renewable energy, that they're actually buying the system mixed power and they're paying for pieces of paper, much in the manner of, of Medici Rome, for the sale of indulgences. And so, there's that. You can say you're 100% renewable, but are you really? But then there's just the matter of the counting of renewables, and something that Tompkins County's done very well is this recounting of greenhouse gas emissions locally, in the methodology that includes, for example, leaking
Right.
natural gas on tankers, right? So you notice, if you look at their charts, that all of the greenhouse gas loads have basically doubled when they included the upstream leakages and so on. And that's critical to see that, because it shows.
Yeah, especially for methane.
Yeah, it's just crazy. So, so then that's where localization comes in, right? That if you take the approach of just a supply-based approach to being clean, then you have these inherent limits on how clean you can really be.
Right.
And that includes things like spinning reserves, right? So if you have renewables, even if you have renewable physical supply like a wind farm, the wind farm will still have a natural gas power plant turning on and off all day in response to the wind dying down and speeding up, or the solar clouds going over. And so it's going on and off all day. So there's that dimension that to decarbonize, you've got to localize, and not just in a marginal way, which is how it's done now, but in a strategic way, where you're significantly localizing. And the approach that we call CCA 3.0, which is this latest iteration of community choice aggregation, is singularly centered on that localization pathway, and how you, through localization, then not only can reduce the load on the grid, that is how much power your community is physically importing into, which has a much greater carbon reduction than having, say, a wind farm power through the grid, but also that it specifically does so by doing things like heat smart, right? Putting in heat pump, switching the gas heaters to electric, and using electric heating in conjunction with on-site renewable generation to absorb that energy, right? So as a form of storage. To do the same thing with vehicles, with electric vehicles. So now you're offsetting not just your pollution from the grid, but you're also reducing pipeline imports of natural gas and gasoline diesel imports for vehicles. And so now you're talking about a multi-sectoral reduction, where the different sectors of greenhouse gas emissions that you're reducing actually augment each other, financially augment each other, right? So if you can, because right now, and this is getting into the weeds a lot. He said this is a geek, so here's a geek insight that's really often difficult to explain to people, because it's very difficult. Because of the regulatory systems erase these distinctions, and they create an illusory simplicity. Right. You buy solar on your roof and you sell it back onto the grid. Right.
Right. Because they're just economy based. They're just market based. They're not
market based.
Yeah.
It's like this sort of fiction that of unreality.
Everything is turned into a market in our culture. Everything.
And it really
it's ridiculous. Even the arts have to prove that they create jobs in order to justify themselves. Like that, it's like totally ridiculous. Everything is a market now.
Yeah. And so the artist, unless the artist is already popular, they can't get any funding, and they have to show
Right.
participation in their artwork. And it's like artists sit around alone and do things. Is that okay? Right.
Right. Right. Do we value poets?
Yeah,
Really? Do we value music? It's just like ridiculous.
it is ridiculous.
But anyway,
Net metering. Today we have net metering, right? And that's how
yeah,
all solar people putting up solar, they get the net metering tariff from the utility. The utility pays them for power. So what that really means is that you put the solar on your roof, and the power from your solar does not go into your house. It goes onto the grid. You basically just built a power plant for the utility, and they keep selling you power, and they keep selling the same power you were buying before. Credits. So you're still causing emissions because you're buying it. You're selling them capacity from your panels, but what you're selling them is under a cap, a severe cap. All over the world, this is true, not just in New York. Severe cap, like in a lot of places, 5% of system-wide load is eligible. 10%. Today, 15% is considered very high. If a utility allows 15% of its system-wide load to be served by rooftop solar under a net metering tariff, that's considered very liberal. But think of that in a carbon context. How are you ever going to get to energy transition with a 15% cap? You're not going to. The issue is that because of the model, like you said, the market model, you're not allowed to just use your solar energy on
right.
it. You're required
Right.
to sell it back and keep buying.
Unless you buy batteries.
Unless you buy batteries.
Unless
Exactly.
you're off the grid completely and you buy batteries.
That's right. Or if you get a hybrid, a smart inverter that's a hybrid that
Right.
allows you to control which it's going to do.
Right.
And so that's where you get this. So you can see the technological opening. If you can afford the battery today, you can get out of that scenario, but it significantly increases the price of the system. To
Right.
do so very few people can afford to buy the Tesla.
That's right. Yep.
You look at that and think, okay, well, here's a few insights on how you could change. You could do something like a Tesla wall, but without having to be rich. But it would take this sort of mediating function to put the pieces together so that you could actually do it. And the first thing would be what HeatSmart does, which is that you switch over heating systems to your panels. So now your panels don't need to export nearly as much because they're offsetting your natural gas bills. And that's where your savings are being incurred. Instead of having savings by being paid by the utility, you have savings by not paying a natural gas bill. And if you do the same thing for an electric vehicle, well, electric vehicles cost money too, but people already buy vehicles, right? It's part of the habit pattern.
Culture. Yeah.
To buy them. So buy a vehicle with a special configuration that allows it to be used as battery storage on the house.
Right.
Right. A 300-mile range automobile car is the equivalent of 7 Tesla walls. 7. So that's $70,000 of Tesla walls built in to a $30,000 or $40,000 car. If you think of it that way, it's a huge battery.
Right.
So now if you're able to use that battery, to charge that battery with your panels, and to use that battery when you need it on a routine basis, not an emergency basis, on a daily basis, now you're avoiding both grid power purchases and gasoline purchases.
Right.
So you
Right.
recover savings from avoiding gasoline.
Right. So
Utility.
yeah, this is what you're referring to when you're saying that what we need to do is localize our sources.
Yep.
This is one of the aspects of localizing our sources. But in the city, in the town of Ithaca, we don't have a huge amount of land for big solar arrays, or like when we talk about community in that sense, we're going to have to talk more about a region than a city or even a county, because we just don't have the space, to put up big solar farms and to local. So when you say localize, what's on the horizon for localizing in Ithaca?
Our singular focus is redevelopment in the urban core. So the market has avoided the urban core putting solar on rooftops for several reasons. And so our program design is really intended to overcome those reasons. Major reason is the cost of acquisition of a rooftop and the cost of acquisition of the customers. So the solar developers are looking for, megawatt scale installations, and they would view a 200 kilowatt scale installation as very small. And so they look at the sort of marginal cost of subscribing the customer, leasing rooftops, and then the permitting delays, the complexity of developing on a rooftop versus a greenfield. And so they don't want to deal with it. They also want to have they want credit-worthy counterparties, customers that have 650 credit scores. Many of them will not even deal with non-Fortune 500 company counterparts. They want the billionaires to be their customers, or the government, right? So-called safe haven. They don't want to deal with certainly not sub 650 credit scores. They will not even talk to you. But even if you do have a 650 credit score, they want you to own the roof. They want it to be a new roof. They want everything to be perfect. And so you have this sort of, in a sense, indolent market that has been hesitant to deal with the urban core. But the urban core is where things really have to happen. Also, you have this sort of technology-centric approach to the market, which is you have solar companies that want to build solar. And so they might try to build a microgrid or something else onto their solar, but mostly they're solar companies. And so they're starting with the technology rather than looking at a city and saying, where could you put, well, solar, but also where could you put small hydro? Where could you put electric vehicles? Where could you put the city as more of an organism, a place that has specific concentration points to transit corridors, for example, places with a lot of vehicles, places where there's where the buses go, places where there's a lot of multi-residential buildings, but in particular multi-use environments. So you have people living there, working there. We have a diversity of energy use and a high density of energy use. And so the gap there is really that how would a private sector company do that kind of reconnaissance? They just don't. They don't have the data. They don't have the relationship. They're developing. They send something.
It's too small. It's just too small, and they don't want to pay attention to that many small details. They want something big, do it once, it's done. They don't have to worry about it. It's like, that makes sense.
It is, and it's destroying farms all over the place at this point.
Yeah,
and that's the new, the new definition of green. And so we're trying to go beyond that, and which means to tackle the urban problem, and specifically to view it as a municipal mission. That it's municipalities that have the ability to plan these things. It's municipalities that can effectively engage people, that can reduce the transaction costs, that can rationalize the processes, that can sort of do intermediary things between the end users who really don't know how to deal with their options and the suppliers who don't know how to deal with a disorganized market. And so to organize the market, to get access to knowledge about energy use and where it's happening, to analyze it, figure out, to do the kind of things that HeatSmart's doing, evaluating what would really fit in a building, what based on the energy use pattern, the meter history in the building, the quality of the physical quality of the building, the credit scores of the residents, the ownership structure of the building, all these factors that can be parsed, and each of them has an appropriate commercialization pathway, but it's just not a priori. It needs to be figured out, and to sort it out so that, and then to set those deals up. Sometimes I call it a matchmaking procedure, because it's just, and that's the HeatSmart thing you were talking about. Just you look at someone in the middle who's trustworthy, objective, well-intentioned, trying to get a maximum benefit both economically to the end user, but also real carbon benefit, and can sort of do that interstitial work between plates, the tectonic plates of the market and reality.
So I mean, the benefit also of looking at things that granularly, that small, is that you get away from the market-based approach, the economic approach, and you actually engage the community. You're actually talking to building owners, and you're actually looking at actual. So it's much more engaging, and it's much more transparent, which I think should help with the with the trust. But when we're talking about localization, it seems to me like I heard that there is a talk of a city solar array somewhere in the southwest of the city. And there's some talk of microgrids or geothermal grids. Are
Mhm.
those the two main within the city ideas for localization?
Those are certainly high on the list. I mean, the microgrid as a connective sharing micro infrastructure is essential because the main action of it is trying to integrate different energy uses into one interoperable system. So the way I was describing with electric vehicles or with heating systems, so the microgrid is that connective tissue that then the geothermal districts or heat loops, depending on the size of them. Heat loops can just be one street. It doesn't have to be a whole neighborhood. And so those are critical because heating is such a major cause of carbon. It's also, in some ways, a more dramatic economic opportunity. So it enriches the mix. If it's part of the mix, it enriches the deal for everyone. And that's one of the big benefits of integrating. Same as with electric vehicles, right? Because
Right.
we're paying a lot for gasoline. And so if you can replace a gas car with an electric vehicle, you're saving them a lot of money on gasoline. And that vehicle happens to be a battery for their microgrid, which saves them a lot of money on grid electricity at the same time.
Yep.
So you get into these nonlinear economics when
Yep.
you change the mold like that. So you're
Yep.
not just saying, oh, I have to buy credits or to mitigate my power, and the power markets are going up and down and stuck in this kind of two-dimensional world. It's much more three-dimensional, and
Right.
opportunities are more specific. So yeah, but microgrids, thermal districts, local solar, and I'm not privy to all of the specific projects in town, so I'm just sort of setting up the structure that will investigate and pursue and support this type of redevelopment. But my view is, we're talking about the way I think about it is it would be looking to put a microgrid on every block in the city, and it would start in just between a couple of buildings, because you have to subscribe people. They have to actually want to do it, and the building owners have to want to do it. So you're finding those that want to be the leaders, and you're supporting their leadership. But then on the side of it would also be, so pardon me, the intention then would be for that microgrid to grow on that block.
Right.
And then to support that would be a shares structure where those who are unable to develop a microgrid could participate through essentially a checkbox procedure in the equity that is produced by those projects. So you could essentially be a member of a microgrid, but actually not physically served by it, but hoping someday you will be. Right? So you're able to participate even if you're not one of the lucky. But those who are lucky, those who can get the site control to do a project on their building, would also be given the support to implement that project. And so you get this kind of dynamic, is the idea, where the microgrids would grow on each block out to the point. Whether they ever go beyond a block is speculative. I've worked on projects in which that was possible. It often is not possible to build a microgrid beyond a block level. So that's sort of the concept, is block sort of growing out from one or two buildings out on that block.
Yep. So that all sounds very exciting for within the city and the town, but we're going to need more than that in terms of supply if we want to really localize. And one of the concerns that I've heard is if we look beyond, into the more rural areas of Tompkins County, where there's land available to potentially put up solar farms, there's a huge amount of pushback. Some of it rational, some of it irrational. But the rational part is that there are people who are concerned that in Tompkins County, we only create about 20% of our food locally.
Mhm.
And 80% comes from, well, it used to come from California and Florida, but now they're burned up and underwater. So that's going to change. But we're going to need to grow a lot more food locally than we currently do. And so there are people who aren't farmers who are concerned about preserving farmland and not putting solar up. And then there are farmers who are not making enough money farming and would be glad to have solar come in and put up all over their. So there's a tension there
Mhm.
that needs to get resolved. And I think there is some recent work on agriculture underneath panels,
Mhm.
which is hopeful,
Mhm.
which we need to look into. But that's going to be one of the challenges that we need to solve is land use and growing food and how to get enough localization of sourcing.
Yes, no, I would join those who were very concerned about farm solar because it's happening where I live here too, and we're doing something about it.
Yeah,
Because it's the truth of the matter is all the systems that are being installed out there are export systems. They are industrializing farms. They're not benefiting the local community. They're not being used in the local community.
right.
And so there's none of that sort of organic logic to it.
Right.
At the same time, there's an over focus on single technologies when people model like how much can you localize. We've done models for big cities like San Francisco. They're very detailed models, like 3-year models with 5-year data sets and tons of research and development money to figure it out, but also small towns, college towns, places that have coal power, cheap power. We've done a lot of different models, and localization is underrated. That the localization models that you see out there are all based on, it's the same as these market structures. They'll say, well, how can you do solar? How many rooftops do you have? And they do solar rooftop analysis like the Google tool. And they produce a model based on a rooftop Google assessment. It's totally silly because you have so many different resources apart from photovoltaics in the city that are being ignored. And they're just not being included, right? Such as small hydro, for example. There's all this hydro around you, okay? There's also a mountain of garbage next to every town and a flow of garbage, which is filling up the oceans right now, which is all convertible to hydrogen potentially, right? Another controversial subject, turning garbage.
Right. Maybe that's the next power lunch.
Of course, yeah. But I mean, then there's waste heat, right? There's all this waste heat, massive amounts of waste heat. In some studies we've done, we found enough. These are just the boilers, right? Hot water boilers in big buildings. In some cities, we found enough waste heat unused, just going out of a pipe to power, a significant part of the cities. So if you look at all the resources that are laying around,
yeah, it's richer than we think.
it is. And so we've gotten into localizations that we could bring the annualized and daily load duration curve, the daily shape of demand. We could localize in the best models in the mid 70s percentile of all power could be generated within the jurisdiction of these are urban areas. And in the worst cases, they're around 50, half, So either way, even half is a massive
it's huge
gas reduction. If it's a physical reduction of load on the grid and the pipelines, as opposed to a 50% sourcing of renewable energy from central plants. So if you think about it in that way, there's a lot of room in there to reduce carbon before you need to get into a fight about solar fields. For me, I would try to avoid solar fields, and that would be a design criterion. And if you get to in the end game where you just can't do it, but then there's all the automobiles. I mean, if you include all the automobiles.
Well, I just have to say, I know Rebecca wants us to wrap up, but I just have to say that we're lucky to have you. I mean,
I'm so glad to be here. Really.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, especially with your attitude of, okay, I'm going to start setting things up, but we need to be trustworthy and transparent and connect to the community. And I think that's another barrier that we have to face, is we need to roll this out in a way that people don't feel like the government is trying to do something to us.
Yeah.
You know, like the government is telling us we can't use incandescent bulbs anymore. They're taking away our hamburgers. You know, I mean, we have to avoid the sense among people that the government is trying to tell them what to do, as though the government was something other than the people. But never mind that. So this idea of making it be more trustworthy, more transparent, engaging people, educating, communicating, and starting there. And I mean, that's your attitude. And I'm really grateful that you're coming in with that attitude to work with us, because there are a lot of people locally who are ready to do this and want to help however we can. And it's going to make a big difference to have your expertise and your experience guiding us at the beginning. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm thrilled to do it. And
yeah, thrilled to have you. Hi,
Well,
Rebecca.
Hello. Thank you both so much. You know, I was going to say basically what Anne was going to already said, is that we are really grateful to have you working with us on this. This is super, super exciting. Just another piece of the Green New Deal that will hopefully change lives all across Ithaca and potentially even the region and the country. So thank you both so much for being here
And the
today.
world.
Louise and the
would say,
world.
we're changing the world.
We are changing the world one solar farm at a time. No, but seriously, thank you both so much. I'm really, really appreciative. And thank you everyone who attended on YouTube today. And we will be back in the new year with new content, new power lunches, and new conversations. So we look forward to seeing you then.
Good to be with you, Paul. Thank you so much.
thanks, Anne.